Before the storms of the 20th century, Vietnam was a land of ancient traditions, independent kingdoms, and a deep...
The first whispers of European presence came in the 16th century, primarily through traders and missionaries seeking new routes and converts. By the 17th century, French missionaries were actively establishing footholds, often preceding military and political interests. Through treaties and strategic alliances, French influence slowly expanded, often exploiting internal divisions within Vietnam's ruling elite.
The mid-19th century marked the beginning of direct military conquest, as France sought to establish a colonial empire in Southeast Asia.
The capture of Saigon in 1859 was a pivotal moment, signaling the inexorable advance of French colonial power.
By 1862, Cochin China, the southern region of Vietnam, was formally declared a French colony under direct rule.
The central and northern regions, Annam and Tonkin, were subsequently declared French protectorates, maintaining a facade of local rule. By 1887, the French Indochina Union was established, consolidating Vietnam, Cambodia. A robust colonial administration was quickly put in place, designed to extract maximum benefit for the metropolitan power.
The Governor-General wielded immense power, effectively ruling Indochina as a direct extension of Paris. Under French rule, significant infrastructure projects like railways and roads were constructed, primarily to facilitate resource extraction. Vast rubber plantations, particularly in Cochin China, became symbols of brutal forced labor and immense French profit.
Coal mines in Tonkin provided another rich source of wealth, often at a horrific cost to the Vietnamese workers.
Despite being a primary rice producer, much of Vietnam's harvest was exported, leading to chronic food shortages for its own people. Colonial society was rigidly stratified, with French administrators at the top, followed by a collaborating Vietnamese elite.
Kính chào ngài. Oui.
Many Vietnamese mandarins and landlords collaborated with the French, securing their own positions and wealth.
For the vast majority of Vietnamese peasants, colonial rule meant increased poverty. Heavy
education was introduced in the French language, but access was limited, primarily serving to train a small administrative class.
Traditional Vietnamese culture and education were often suppressed, replaced by French norms and language.
The French established lucrative monopolies on opium, alcohol, and salt, creating significant revenue at the expense of...
Even essential commodities like salt were heavily taxed and controlled, further burdening the Vietnamese populace. The alcohol monopoly fueled social problems while enriching the colonial administration.
Large tracts of communal land were appropriated by the French, often for plantations, dispossessing countless Vietnamese farmers.
The system of corvée, or forced labor, was widely used for public works, mirroring the conditions of slavery. Despite overwhelming odds, pockets of resistance emerged almost immediately, led by scholar gentry and local chiefs.
The Khăn Vuông movement, or Aid the King movement, sought to restore Vietnamese independence, but ultimately failed against French might.
In the early 20th century, figures like Phan Boi Châu advocated for armed struggle and looked to Japan for inspiration. In contrast, Phan Chu Trinh favored peaceful reform, believing collaboration with the French could lead to gradual independence.
These early movements, though diverse in strategy, planted the crucial seeds of modern Vietnamese nationalism. A young man named Nguyen Ai Quoc, later known as Ho Chi Minh, left Vietnam to seek pathways to liberation abroad.
At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Ho Chi Minh appealed for Vietnamese self-determination, only to be ignored by the victorious powers. Disillusioned with Western liberalism, Ho Chi Minh turned to Marxist-Leninism, seeing it as a powerful tool for anti-colonial struggle. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh helped found the Indochinese Communist Party, uniting disparate nationalist and communist factions.
Rival nationalist groups such as the Vietnam Quốc dân Đảng (VNQDD) also emerged, advocating for a republican form of government.
In response to growing unrest, French repression intensified, with arrests, executions, and surveillance becoming commonplace.
The Great Depression of the 1930s hit Indochina hard, exacerbating poverty and fueling anti-colonial sentiment.
As World War II erupted in Europe, the geopolitical landscape of Indochina began to shift dramatically. The swift fall of France to Nazi Germany in 1940 left its colonial possessions, including Indochina, vulnerable and isolated.
The colonial administration in Indochina pledged allegiance to the collaborationist Vichy regime, navigating a complex new reality.
Japan, seeking resources and a strategic advantage in its own expansionist war, began to exert immense pressure on French Indochina. In 1940, Japan began its military occupation of northern Indochina, later extending its control over the entire region.
An uneasy dual administration emerged, where French officials continued daily governance under Japanese oversight.
Japan ruthlessly exploited Indochina's resources, especially rice, coal, and rubber, to fuel its war machine.
The Japanese demand for rice, coupled with Allied bombing of transport and natural disasters,
Estimates suggest that between 1 and 2 million Vietnamese perished from starvation during this horrific period. The famine ignited widespread fury and galvanized popular support for anti-colonial forces offering solutions.
In 1941, Ho Chi Minh returned to Vietnam, forming the Viet Minh, a broad nationalist front led by the communists.
The Viet Minh's primary goals were simple: independence from foreign rule and land reform for the impoverished peasantry.
During World War II, the United States briefly aided the Viet Minh against the Japanese, unaware of future implications.
Fearing an Allied invasion,
This marked the abrupt and humiliating end of French colonial rule in Indochina, at least for the moment.
Japan quickly installed a puppet empire of Vietnam under Emperor Bảo Đại, granting nominal independence.
In August 1945, with the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan unconditionally surrendered to the Allies. Japan's surrender created a massive power vacuum across Indochina, with no clear authority in charge.
Seizing the moment, the Viet Minh launched the August Revolution, rapidly taking control of key cities. Ho Chi Minh arrived in Hanoi, ready to declare Vietnam's long-awaited independence.
All men are created equal.
On September 2, 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared the independence of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam.
His words deliberately echoed the American Declaration of Independence, hoping to garner international support.
The Allied powers, however, had their own post-war plans for Indochina, dividing it at the 16th parallel.
In the south, British forces arrived with orders to disarm the Japanese, but effectively facilitated the return of the French.
In the north, Chinese nationalist troops entered, ostensibly to disarm the Japanese, but also to assert their own influence.
With British backing, the French rapidly reasserted control over Saigon and southern Vietnam.
This reoccupation led to immediate, violent clashes with the Viet Minh and other nationalist groups.
Ho Chi Minh, facing multiple threats, initially sought a diplomatic solution, even with the French. The 1946 Franco-Vietnamese Accords allowed French troops into the north in exchange for recognition of Vietnam as...
However, French intentions remained clear: to re-establish full colonial control, not true independence.
Tensions quickly escalated, culminating in the French shelling of Haiphong in November 1946, killing thousands of civilians.
This atrocity effectively triggered the First Indochina War, marking the full-scale conflict for Vietnamese independence. The French strategy relied on conventional military might, controlling major cities and transportation routes.
The Viet Minh, under Võ Nguyên Giáp, embraced guerrilla warfare, melting into the countryside and striking unexpectedly.
While the French controlled urban centers, the Viet Minh increasingly dominated the vast rural areas.
Following the Chinese Communist victory in 1949, crucial military aid and training flowed to the Viet Minh.
Fearing the spread of communism, the United States began providing significant financial and military aid to France. The domino theory emerged, suggesting that if Vietnam fell to communism, other Southeast Asian nations would follow.
The war escalated into brutal struggle, taking a heavy toll on both sides and the civilian population. Despite French firepower, the Viet Minh's deep popular support and unwavering resolve proved to be a formidable force.
Years of protracted warfare and heavy casualties began to erode French morale and political will.
In 1953, the French established a heavily fortified base at Dien Bien Phu, hoping to draw the Viet Minh into a decisive conventional battle.
The base was situated in a valley, surrounded by hills that the French believed were impenetrable for heavy artillery.
The Viet Minh, however, undertook a monumental logistical feat, hauling artillery piece by piece up the surrounding mountains. On March 13, 1954, the Viet Minh launched their assault, catching the French by surprise with their heavy bombardment.
The Viet Minh quickly neutralized the French airfield, cutting off crucial air resupply and reinforcement.
The battle devolved into brutal trench warfare, with the Viet Minh steadily encroaching on French positions.
As weeks turned into months, the situation for the trapped French garrison became increasingly desperate. In Washington, there were intense debates about direct American military intervention to save the French.
On May 7, 1954, after 56 brutal days, Dien Bien Phu fell to the Viet Minh.
This stunning defeat marked the end of French colonial ambition in Indochina. Even as Dien Bien Phu fell, international powers were meeting in Geneva to discuss the future of Indochina. The resulting Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, creating North and South.
The North became the Democratic Republic of Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh's communist leadership. The South remained the state of Vietnam, initially under Emperor Bao Dai, backed by the French.
Crucially, the accord stipulated nationwide elections in 1956 to unify the country. However, the United States, fearing a communist victory, refused to sign the accords and opposed the elections.
In 1955, Ngo Dinh Diem, strong anti-communist, ousted Bao Dai and established the Republic of Vietnam in the south.
Diem's regime, increasingly authoritarian and unpopular, consolidated power with heavy American support.
The division led to a mass migration, with many Catholics fleeing communism to the south and Viet Minh sympathizers moving north.
The United States rapidly increased its military and economic aid to South Vietnam, sending advisors and equipment.
In the north, Ho Chi Minh focused on consolidating power, implementing land reform, and rebuilding the war-torn economy. Despite Diem's efforts, a communist-led insurgency began to take root in the rural areas of South Vietnam.
In 1960, the National Liberation Front, known as the Viet Cong, was formed to overthrow Diem's government.
Diem responded with harsh repression, further alienating the populace and fueling the insurgency.
His discriminatory policies against Buddhists led to a major crisis, drawing international condemnation.
The United States grew increasingly frustrated with Diem's inability to win hearts and minds, and his political instability.
With tacit American approval, Diem was overthrown and assassinated in a military coup in November 1963.
Diem's death ushered in a period of intense political instability in South Vietnam, with a succession of weak governments. To supply the insurgency, North Vietnam developed the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a vast network of jungle supply routes. By the early 1960s, the number of American military advisors in South Vietnam had grown to thousands. In August 1964, alleged attacks on U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin provided a pretext for wider intervention.
The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution granted President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to use military force in Vietnam.
In March 1965, the first official U.S. combat troops landed in Vietnam, marking a dramatic escalation. Soon after, Operation Rolling Thunder began, a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam.
By the end of 1965, the United States was fully embroiled in a full-scale ground war in Vietnam.
The seeds of conflict sown during the colonial era